Good morning and welcome to another episode of Logistics with Purpose. I'm your host, Enrique Alvarez, and I have my fearless co-host, as always, Kristi Porter. Kristi, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm excited to be here. We have a new kind of topic for us. We talked many times about humanitarian aid, but I don't think we've ever had anybody from a humanitarian aid conference with us before in our 130 plus episodes. So I'm delighted to introduce Nicholas Rutherford, who is the founder and managing director at AidEx. So Nicholas, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
You're welcome. I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Good. Well, to get you started, we're just going to get things moving and we're going to ask you some quick questions and just give us the first thing that comes to the top of your mind. And then we'll get into your career and everything you've done since then. And of course, AidEx as well. So first question, favorite book?
I don't have a favorite book.
Okay.
I've read lots of books in my lifetime, and I like literature. I like historical literature. I've read a couple of interesting historic books recently. One was called The White Ship by Charles Spencer. It's about a ship that sank in the Channel off the coast of France in 1120. This is going to blow your mind. The ship had 300 people on board. It was the medieval equivalent of an A380. And, you know, there were horses, there were people. The unfortunate thing is that this ship was after a successful campaign by the English in France, a military campaign in France, and they had all their hierarchy on the ship, and they pretty much were all drowned, including the heir to the throne. So it created a crisis in succession. The only person who survived out of the 300 was a butcher, and he was on the ship because he'd been in France collecting debts from all these people who owed him money.
Wow.
Interesting book. And I'm just
Yeah.
reading another book, which is about, you may have heard of Thomas à Becket, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury. He was martyred by the king or by the king's knights. And this is a book which has been written by a guy called Guy John. And it's very enjoyable. I'm getting into that at the moment.
Fantastic. I love that. That's a totally different spin. And that book sounds utterly fascinating. Thank you. What is a quote that inspires you?
Yeah. Well, sticking to the historic theme, there is and it always brings a lump to my throat when I hear it, is the St. Crispin's Day speech that occurs in Henry V, the Shakespeare play. And it's the speech that starts, "We few, we happy few, we band of brothers," from which Band of Brothers took its name, the Spielberg TV episode. It's a fantastic speech. It's about shared blood and brotherhood, and it's the eve of Agincourt. And I don't know if you know this, but on the eve of Agincourt, there were 5,000 British soldiers against 100,000 French soldiers, and the British won.
We're elevating our conversations with you. I can already tell. This is amazing. Where's your favorite place to be?
I live in Kent, and we have a lovely old city, and again ties in with my interest in history, called
Yeah.
Canterbury, and that's my favourite place to be.
Oh, good. So you get to be there every day. Well, what always gives you a mental boost for your day?
Uh, Coffee,
Yeah.
and my team.
Yeah.
I'm very fortunate. I've got a great team, and we usually start the day with a meeting, discussing what the agenda is for the day, what we need to concentrate on, who's going to do what, compare notes, ask questions, so that we're all aligned and we work very closely together. That's how we start our day.
Love that. Thank you.
Well, Nicholas, thank you so much for those answers. I'll add one quick question to the list, if you allow me. What's your favorite Premier League team? Who you?
My famous Premier League.
Yeah,
What, as in football?
as in football.
Soccer?
Yep. I
Okay.
didn't know if I should just go ahead and call it soccer right off the bat because you were
Yeah,
gonna,
you should, because
no.
it's confusing. I mean,
It
North
is.
America has football, and so do
And I
we, and
am
it's
from
not the same.
Mexico, so I'm here. I'm with you, Nicholas, on this. That's
Okay,
why I
all right,
didn't mention it.
understood, completely understood. Yes, Mexico has a fantastic
Football.
football credential. Um, I mean, it's Tottenham Hotspur.
Oh boy. Well, good luck. I mean, they're in the final. They haven't had like a great season, but hopefully they can turn it around and maybe even
It's a
be.
lifetime of Enrique. It's a lifetime of misery. But
There,
I'm a
it
loyal
is. It
individual,
is.
and when I decided to support Tottenham Hotspur, I was about 6, and I've stuck with them ever since. So that's a long time. It's a lifetime of misery.
It is. You had your time. Hopefully, you'll come again for all those sport fans out there that are listening to this podcast. We feel for you, but again, you can be in the Champions League next year if you win the next game.
So who's your Premier League team?
Well, I was afraid that you were going to ask me that because maybe this interview is not going to go the way it was supposed
They
to.
don't downhill
Don't
from
say
here.
Manchester
Well,
United,
I'm a
please.
Chelsea fan. They haven't really been like a great team, but above all, I'm a Barcelona fan. That's my team.
Okay, understandable.
So, Nicholas, thank you once again for your answers. Thanks again for being here. We're delighted to have you. It's going to be a very interesting conversation. Can you tell us a little more about your background, your childhood? How do you grew up? What kind of started shaping the person that you actually became?
Well, that's a tough one. So I had an idyllic childhood. I had wonderful parents, a secure childhood, and when I look back on my first, I don't know, 11, 12 years, I look back with very fond memories. I'm fortunate because, of course, that's not the condition of lots of people. And I suppose once I got to about the age of 11 or 12, I began to realize that the world wasn't quite as I saw it. And actually, it had lots of problems, lots of negatives as well as positives. And little by little, over a long period of time, I would say, my views changed. My parents were very conservative, with a small c. They were nice people, they didn't have extreme views. They were lovely people, adorable. Um, but as I grew older, I began to realize that there's a lot of unfairness in the world,
Right.
and I went from a cozy little fee-paying school to a large non-fee-paying school, boys' school, and that was the beginning of my road of discovery, and it's continued to this day. I have a particular thing. I feel that there is so much unfairness in the world, and that's really my drive.
That makes perfect sense. Would you mind sharing about something? Is there something in particular that comes to mind when you started understanding that sense of unfairness, or something that you recognized the difference between you and someone else's upbringing, or what was happening in the world around you?
Well, if you take my country, the UK, um, this is probably a bit controversial, so I shall have to frame it carefully. Um, we are a very traditional, historic country, and I've just told you I have a passion for history. Um, I feel like nothing very much has changed in my lifetime in terms of the way that power is held and the way that the country is run. The people in charge quite often still come from the same privileged backgrounds. Um, Ordinary people are still treated the same way. And the level of opportunity, perhaps, that we would like to have seen after all these years and the modern age isn't always there for people. And that's just the UK. If I then think about my traveling, I've traveled all over the world many, many times. I've been to lots of countries which are worse than the UK in that respect, and some that are better than the UK in that respect. But I've realised that um, you know there are many people who have a great deal to offer that often it's not recognized and never realized.
That's true. And actually, I was looking through an article the other day. I'm fascinated with culture, and I read something about the happiness index, and they bring this up every year. They come up with a list of the countries that are the happiest. And before I give you the whole spiel out of the comment, let's say if you or Kristi can guess what the happiest country is 8 years in a running right now, what would be your guess, Nicholas? And then I'll ask Kristi.
I'm going to cheat. I'm going to
Oh,
put
so you know
Scandinavia.
this.
I'm going to put Scandinavia together, and
Well, you
I'm
basically
going
just
to mention
won. They've been the first three for the last eight
Yeah.
years, but it's
and
Finland.
Canada.
Finland, number one again, and the reason I brought this up is because the UK, to what you were saying, it's 23, and the US is 24. But so anyways, I agree with what you said. And you began your life in newspaper and
Yeah.
media. We could probably have a whole podcast or a few episodes dedicated fully to media and what media has become now to probably what it was then. Newspaper, you ran your own publishing business. What drew you into media? How was it that you got into that particular industry?
Well, the power of the press. The power of the press in UK is or has been
Right.
overwhelming, and it's helped to win and lose elections for parties, and it's been the making and undoing of powerful people. Um, it's fading though, isn't it? With
It is.
electronic media and social media, the power of the press isn't what it used to be. But when I started, it was. I mean, it was uh, newspapers. I started working in a place called Fleet Street in London, and in those days, all the newspapers were shoulder to shoulder in Fleet Street in London, and it was the buzziest, most incredible place you can think of. Great big lorries with huge tonnage of paper and great big rolls trundling down the street every day, uh, presses on the lower floor in the buildings, the editorial and sales offices, and the senior management all in the building. So big heavyweight newspapers, Daily Express, Daily Mail, Daily Telegraph, Guardian, all these newspapers in Fleet Street in London, and that's where I started. And it seemed like a great place to be when I was a young man.
It must have been very exciting and, of course, interesting as well. And I'm also guessing that that not only helped you shape your worldview, but also gave you additional information around like the fairness of the world and some of the things you started to see earlier on in your life. Did you started to see more of the need for purpose-driven organizations? Did you started to see the need for caring a little bit more and be a little bit more aware of what was going on in the wider communities?
That's true. Even in those days, there was a problem with misinformation, and newspapers used to report on things in a certain way to reflect the attitudes and
Right.
ideas of their readership. And, you know, it's not a good way to report news. News should be reported without fear or favour. It should be impartial. This is the sort of thing that the BBC, for example, will promote and say about themselves. That actually isn't true either. The BBC has a particular slant these days, and um, I think the misinformation situation has really got totally out of hand. And going back to humanitarian uh, aid and international development, um, the reporting on what's happening and how efficient the delivery of aid and development is has coloured people's attitudes against it. which is a real shame because I've been working in this sector for a long time, and I can tell you that the people are fantastic. They work extremely hard, they take incredible risks, and make a big difference.
Well, let's talk about that. I want to hear more about AidEx. We just learned about the conference last year, so I've read the website, all of that, but I'm excited to hear more about it from your point of view. So, first of all, what inspired you to found it? What was the gap that you saw that needed to be filled?
I used to go to a lot of trade fairs, and I would even go to defense shows. And because of the equipment and supplies, I don't mean lethal equipment and
Yeah.
supplies, but stuff like tents and water purification and solar and communications and all that sort of stuff that is shared with the military. And I used to see people from the United Nations having conversations on a stand. There'd be machine guns and missiles on the stand behind them. And I think this is entirely inappropriate. This is not the place for the peacemakers. And I remember going home one day and talking to my wife. She was cooking the dinner, and I said, I've come up with a great idea. And she said, what's that then? And I said, well, I said, there really ought to be an antidote to all this proliferation of defense shows, and it ought to be a peace show.
Wow.
And that was the origin of AidEx.
Wow,
She
fascinating.
said, dinner's
I
going
was
to be
going to
really
ask
short.
what was her reaction. That's awesome. And so how's it grown over the last, when was it founded and how has it grown and what have you seen over the last few years?
Well, it has grown substantially. We
Yeah.
started working on it in 2010. I went to a company called Centaur, which was a PLC in London, who organise lots of events in a variety of different areas: marketing, house building, all that sort of stuff, big shows. And anyway, I got this idea, and I wrote a letter to the MD and said, look, do you think you might be interested in something like this? And he said, well, come in for a cup of coffee. Let's have a chat. So I went in, had a cup of coffee with him, and he then introduced me to their head of events. And the two of us got our heads together, and we realized we were onto something. I was talking about how the military role in those days by Western powers was often supporting UN agencies and the Red Cross, and involved in peace activities, distributing food, helping populations with shelter, building camps, etc., etc. And increasingly in those days, that was what was happening. And I said, we really ought to be looking at this trend, and there really ought to be an event that is about the good guys, the UN agencies, the NGOs, the distribution of relevant products that help people on the ground that are, caught up in natural disasters and political disasters. And they said, well, we'll pay you for some months to be a consultant. Go away and research this. Let's keep working together. We had regular meetings. I was backwards and forwards, and then they said, "Well, why don't you come on board and do it? Let's do it." And we did. And so I was with Centaur for the first, I don't know, 5 years or so, 6 years. And then after a while, change of management and different attitudes in the company. The people that I'd originally launched it with were rock solid behind the idea, but then, changes in management, and, they weren't quite so enthusiastic. And we then moved to a company called Montgomery Exhibitions, and their chairman in those days was a guy called Sandy Angus, and Sandy Angus was passionate about philanthropy, and he had huge travel experience and particular interest in different parts of the world, Africa and India, and we then went there, and then of course we got to COVID. And COVID was terrible for everybody, of course. But
Right.
if one looks at it in a in a business sense, you couldn't really be worse in a worse business than an events industry
Yeah.
in the thick of COVID. And after COVID, Montgomery was reevaluating its strategy and decided that they wanted to concentrate on their multi-million-pound shows. AidEx has always been sustainable, but it doesn't make a fortune. That's
Right.
not what it's about.
Sure.
And so anyway, we bought it out, and I bought it out, and we set up AidEx Geneva Limited, which is where we are now, and we have an agreement to hold the event in Geneva. And Palexpo, which is the venue in Geneva, has been extremely helpful and generous, and it's going extremely well.
15 years, well, yeah.
Yeah.
Nicholas, congratulations. And that idea was inspiring and brilliant. And
Yeah.
you're right. We definitely need this antidote, as you called it, for a peace conference. And we really need now more than probably ever before, right? As we see the
Very true.
more polarized. And so congratulations to you, to your team. I'm sure it's a lot of work, and it's been really interesting to learn a little bit more about what you guys do. And so thank you and congratulations. AidEx and Development 2030, as you said, is held in Geneva, and it draws over 3,000 people every year. You've been doing this for quite a while, so you probably know all the biggest players in the humanitarian world and leaders around the world. What has one thing that has came as surprising or striking to you in terms of like how things have been evolving over the last years, and particularly from COVID to today? And is there some things that we can learn from what you see out there?
Well, I suppose the biggest thing is the collaboration between UN agencies, NGOs, and the commercial sector. People have talked about this for a very long time, and it was mostly talk to start with. And there was a huge suspicion on both sides in the beginning. So UN agencies and NGOs have their goals and objectives, which are to do with, education of children, empowerment of women, purification of water, distribution of food, all these sorts of things. And commercial organizations have their objectives, which are usually profit. So
Right.
how are these two, which seem like oil and water, ever going to get it together? But the reality is that because of continual negativity in the political sphere towards humanitarian aid and international development, the unpopularity amongst electorates, there's been a decline in funding that has seriously impacted humanitarian aid and international development. And of course, we now sit at a time when it's been really acute. Organizations, major UN agencies with 40% reduction in their funding because, USAID has been, mothballed, and this has led to acute problems. Anyway, I'm pleased to say that there is a positive to this. I don't want to sit here wringing my hands and saying, whoa, 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 let's look at the way forward, which is, collaboration between UN agencies, the NGOs, and the commercial sector. And it is working better. There is increasing understanding between both sides. There are numerous examples of successful projects that are working very well. And this is the way forward. This is the future.
Absolutely. And I think that, again, very timely now that we see the government starting to back off a little bit of the aid, all the commercial and companies, private companies are starting to jump back in. And honestly, if you take a look at a deep dive into all these different amazing organizations that are helping the world really thrive, it's something that's going to affect us all. Right. So if you take a look at some of the work that it's been done, no matter where it is, Africa or anywhere else around the world, if you consider those organizations, you would realize, if you really take the time to understand what they're doing, you would really see how important this support is. And so if some governments out there might not see it, the private sector certainly is starting to do so. And I think that that's going to be very exciting going forward as more companies become more purpose driven and understand that if they do help these organizations, at the end of the day, they will be helping themselves in the longer term.
Yeah.
I think that's right. Sorry, Kristi, you were saying
No,
something.
I was going to say, and other good news, you have not only brought all these people together, proven that the model worked and has sustained itself despite all these other things happening in the world, right? There's always pockets of people willing to help, and you've managed to find them and bring them together. There, as long as we find places for these people to congregate and to work together, and you've been able to do that, then I think that is hopeful, and that does bring a lot of solidarity to people willing to collaborate and to bring good to the movement, and to people who are looking for solutions and not just divisions. And in the middle of all of this, as you talked about, you've been through different management agencies, you've seen lots of things in funding and everything, but in the midst of that, you've also expanded to AidEx Nairobi and the Humanitarian Finance Summit. So how have you done that? What did those bring to the? It sounds like you already had a lot to do. So what did those bring to your plate?
Well, the thing with Nairobi is that in those days we were, as you probably know, you've done some research. We've done 2 events in Geneva, and before that we were always in Brussels. The thing about having a conference in Europe that is primarily talking about situations of difficulty in countries in Africa, Southern Asia, places like this, it's all well and good to sit in Europe, but everything is moving in the direction of localization. And we felt that if we were going to be sincere about what we were doing, then we had to have a footprint in Africa. And Nairobi is an important, probably the most important hub in Africa, continental Africa, for aid agencies, the UN, NGOs. And we've done quite a few of these. I can't remember the exact number now. My team would tell me, I think 9 or 10, something like that. It's a different formula. So the event in Europe is big. It's, as you say, 3,000 visitors. It's 2 events actually, because we have AidEx, which is humanitarian, and then we have Development 2030, which is international development. And they share a big exhibition with 200 plus exhibits. The exhibition looks like an industrial exhibition. It's large and substantial. The event in Nairobi is smaller. It's in a hotel, and it has advantages being in a hotel. It means that we get to sit and really discuss things properly, and we have 2 networking lunches. We have a really nice networking reception in the evening. Everybody gets to know everybody. It's sufficiently smaller that actually you get to know everybody. And you can't do that with the best will in the world in Brussels or Geneva because it's too big.
Right.
And we're able to have a panel which is made up of local experts talking about local projects, talking about local challenges, and that feeds into the event in Geneva and used to feed into the event in Brussels. So it makes the event more relevant, more poignant, and that's why we did that. The financial event in London, which is brand spanking new, the first one we did in February, we already knew that there was a problem with funding. This was before USAID. And our timing, of course, was perfect because it coincided with the announcements about USAID, and everybody said, well, how did you know? This is amazing. We've got all these financial experts here talking about alternative ways of funding, innovative finance, blended finance, impact funding. How did you know about all of this stuff? And more by luck than judgment, we just happened to be in the right place at the right time. But obviously it's a commitment to the future, and we've already started work on the next one next February in London. And we've also incorporated a lot of financial content into the event in Geneva because, NGOs and UN agencies even are running around and saying, well, what's the future? What the hell's going on? How sustainable? How much have we got in liquidity that we can, keep going, and where are we going to get our funds from? And whilst we've already discussed the importance of the commercial sector and involvement of big corporations, also there is the specialist financial community, which is in its infancy in this area. It's moving forward at pace, but it's cutting new ground, and that's what we're trying to facilitate. We're not financial experts, as we're not humanitarian experts in the sense that we don't actually provide humanitarian services, but we bring the experts together who do.
Nicholas, let me get into an area that might be somewhat controversial, if you will. And on one hand, and you mentioned that you have humanitarian aid, and it's important. You have public, and you have the private, and you have the non-for-profits. And on the other, you have this notion of profit. What would you say to all those leaders out there, the entrepreneurs, the supply chain professionals? What's your take about like humanitarian aid, which sometimes sounds a little more like charity, and profit and return on investment for corporations? Because for me, they go one in hand with the other. But what would you tell these leaders? Is it charity?
Well, as in all changes and, sort of periods of turbulence, in my experience, there's nearly always something that is good that comes out of it. What's happened in terms of the humanitarian community in the last few months is brutal, to be honest. But what I think is going to come out of it is the ability to fund projects in a way that actually makes a return, that isn't making huge, obscene profits, but that is making a return, making it possible to do good, to achieve the objectives, to make, a difference to people's lives, and still provide sufficient return and reduce risk so that financial institutions are prepared, or corporations are prepared to invest. Maybe that's the word that is coming on board. It's investing as opposed to aid. As I say, I'm not condoning the dissolution of USAID, because I think that was brutal, but and would have been better done over a period of time, with organisations being able to adjust. Because it's had an impact in the field. People, projects have wrapped up. Supplies have stopped, and this is without the natural disasters in the world and the wars that are taking place, and people's lives are at risk. But I think the good that's going to come out of it is a shift in attitude, and organisations being prepared to invest in projects of humanity, knowing that they'll make a reasonable return. They won't lose their money. It's not charity. It's not aid.
Absolutely. And I totally agree with you. I think that this was a little bit short-sighted. USAID actually impacted a lot of organizations and will continue to impact them negatively. I agree with you that this could be a good opportunity to at least cut that umbilical cord and try to find better ways of financing. But I strongly believe that if you support all these different organizations and causes, the return on the investment longer term for the world and the communities and the companies that are fully engaged in supporting those initiatives is going to be positive for sure. So it is a very real investable opportunity for everyone that's listening and for everyone that goes and attends the conferences that you put together.
I hope so. Kristi, you're going to say something.
Yes, and well, kind of along those lines, as you talked about in Nairobi, you've been able to sit across the table from people in Geneva and Brussels. You've been able to talk to very large organizations. So everything from grassroots to, organizational names that we would all know. Are there a couple examples that stand out as far as who is leading well, who is taking great initiative, what you'd like to see more of, but something that has really just sort of piqued your interest as a leader in the field, whether they're doing it at a very small scale or on a very large scale?
Well, as I said, there are a number of financial players, investors and implementers that are cutting new ground and that are providing a financial um, package that is new to the community. And the trouble is that aid organizations and NGOs aren't used to having to approach these organizations in the way that maybe the commercial sector is. And
Sure.
they're having to adjust their strategies and targets and ways of explaining projects and so on and so forth. One of the things we're going to do at AidEx is we're going to have we call it a surgery, where NGOs and aid organizations can come to the surgery and they can talk about ideas as they see it and ask financial experts how that would appear to the financial community in terms of getting support. And the financial community can help them to reframe the proposals so that they're acceptable and more likely to be successful. Um, these sorts of things I think are important. The other thing that's happening is, as I said earlier on, the move towards localization. Most aid organizations realize that the more efficient delivery of aid involves localization. And again, we've talked about this for such a long time, but now it's an absolute necessity. And it's a case of trying to cut out the middleman, so that actually, the use of limited resources is much more efficient. So there's lots going on. I don't want to mention specific organizations and companies because obviously, another one will say, well, why didn't you mention this and why didn't you mention that? That's not
There are too many to pull them
I'm
out.
entirely neutral. I mean, we sit in Switzerland, which is a neutral country, and AidEx is neutral. Everything is neutral.
Yes. Well, I love the surgery idea. That is very cool.
Absolutely. And so, Nicholas, you've seen all this development. You are actually very aware. You put these conferences year after year after year. So what continues to give you hope? And if you can share an example, maybe not an organization as you mentioned, because there's way too many, but just something that you can share with the audience.
Well, there is a huge amount of goodwill behind AidEx, and it is very surprising. After COVID, we had an event that was a real struggle to put together. It was half the size, it had half the attendance, but the people who came were, full of admiration that we had managed to get this event together and that people were at last meeting face to face again to discuss, pressing issues and things that hadn't gone away. And it is really that. It is the goodwill that we have behind AidEx. We get a huge number of approaches from organizations that, come to us after an event and say, this was great, that was great. Obviously, we also get some people who come to us and say, well, you could have done that better. And you could, why did you do it like that?
Always.
You can always do it better, but
yeah, it is. It's a community. I mean,
Yeah.
and that really is what we always set out to achieve. The idea behind AidEx originally was neutral platform, bring everybody together, have two core conference. Well, in those days it was one core conference, but the humanitarian conference, now it's the development conference. Share an exhibition and also encourage organizations to bring their own events. If there is a humanitarian logistics company, for example, or logistics agency that want to organize an event, they're welcome to bring it to AidEx, and we will find space for them, and they can bring their community and they will mix together with it, the bigger community. And it's a tapestry of aid and development organizations. Right. And we want people to think of AidEx and Development 2030 as their event.
I love that. Well, as we wrap up, let's make sure we've got all your events covered for all of our listeners. Tell us what's happening, when they're happening, where they can find you and the events, and let's make sure we can increase some attendance numbers.
Well, Nairobi is 11th and 12th of June, so it's just around the corner.
Yeah.
It's at the Safari Park Hotel.
Ooh.
It's on our website. I'll give you that at the end. So that's that one. Next one will be AidEx in Geneva, which is at Palexpo, which is October the 22nd and 23rd. Palexpo is the fantastic exhibition centre right next to Geneva Airport. So literally you come out of the airport and 10 minutes later, Perfect. You can take your suitcase with you and you're at the expo. It's right there. And then the London financial event will be in London, obviously, on February the 26th. And, looking forward to that. That's how things stand at the moment. We've got lots of ideas. Yes. We're open to lots of suggestions. Anybody that wants to come to us with other ideas and things that we might be able to collaborate on. Collaboration, that's the order of the day.
Absolutely. And what is your website?
www.aid-expo.com.
Perfect.
Well,
thank you so much.
Well, among the many other things that AidEx is doing for people, I love the fact that it's an open invitation to people that are listening. So if you're listening, if you're part of the audience, if you're part of the supply chain, you heard Nicholas, it's an open invitation for you to come and participate and bring your audience, bring your community, reach out to Nicholas. And before we leave, and we thank you for this again, Nicholas, what does the phrase logistics with a purpose mean to you?
I thought about this. I think it means that you are a logistics company that is going where others fear to tread, isn't it?
Well, trying to find out with communities like yours and our clients and people that we work with. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. We appreciate you being here and taking the time. We'll put a lot of the notes for this as we post it to our social media. Hopefully a lot of the people in our communities are more aware of what you and your team are doing. Congratulations once again. And for the audience, thanks for joining us at this episode of Logistics with Purpose. And you like what you hear, if you like the conversations we're having, please feel free to join, sign up, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Nicholas, for the terrific work you're doing and bringing people together and getting aid to more people. So we appreciate you. We appreciate our listeners, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you too. Thank you.